Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Mastering Dungeons, which we are recording for the magnitudes of followers who didn't actually come to Gamehole Con. I'm Sean Merwin, and I'm here, as I always am, in person this time. He smells delicious. Teos Avadia.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody here at the con. It's been awesome talking to some of you already. So,
yeah. And as we often do, we will have a special episode here. We're not going to talk about news and listener email, but we will be taking questions from the audience here.
And I'm going to break that rule immediately.
I know.
There was a listener question that I was able to get a con answer to.
Okay.
And the question by Vintage Zebra 5527, their real name, via YouTube was, is there some official D&D pronouncement that the city's name, Sigil, is pronounced differently than the word Sigil? Any dictionaries I've referenced have the G pronounced as a J. And there was a really good YouTube answer by Jeff Dewitt6845. The pronunciation was born out of the elder days, when Beleriand stood above the waves. The Valar named Monty Cook handed it to the sons of Fëanor, saying, "Thou shan't call it Sybil, neither shall you call it Signal, and Sigil is the right out. Thus it shall forever be." I thought that was a good answer.
I don't understand. So what are we supposed to call it?
Well, as fun as that was, yeah. I went to, this morning, just 30 minutes ago, Zeb Cook.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, except the fact that he actually made Planescape.
Right. Yeah. And he said, "Why do people keep asking me this?" And so I told him that the 5e team now says that it's, Sigil.
Yeah.
And he said, they said what? So Zeb says no. So you can go back to Sigil if you'd like.
I definitely want to do that.
Here we go.
We pronounced it Sigil. And we actually got some very irate people saying you should pronounce it correctly. What's that?
Engagement.
Yeah. and so, bending through peer pressure as I do, I started calling it Sigil, and Teos gave into peer pressure.
Because you were doing it. You made me do it.
So now I'm going back to Sigil.
Yeah, Sigil.
All right.
It sounds so much better, right?
It does.
Sigil.
Yeah.
Who likes Sigil?
It's
okay.
Jeff.
It's pronounced gay peg. And,
it's great peanut butter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to hunt Zeb down so we could actually get that.
It was at his house. I was just.
Just knocked on his door. No wonder he was so irate. Why do people keep doing this?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Teos. At times, I'm going to repeat some questions that came from the audience. So you hear my voice just kind of explain what the audience member asked. And also right now, I'm going to add some additional information to this fascinating question of how you pronounce the city of Doors. It's Doors. No, kidding. We spoke with Monty Cook at a game, and he said that he agreed with Zeb Cook that it's always been Sigil. But in the time between speaking to Zeb and Monty, some of the folks on our Patreon Discord, thank you everyone, found some pretty interesting information. In fact, if you go to DriveThruRPG and look at the preview of the Planescape main product, you will see a screenshot of what you can also see if you own the product and look at it, which is that it has a quote where in character, one of the lawful organizations is saying that if you mispronounce the name, you're going to be in trouble. And it explains that to mispronounce it is to give it a J sound. And it's spelled Sigil to make that point. So that would say that it is Sigil. And then there's an audio CD that was produced, and that also calls it Sigil. I also spoke to a 5e staff member that said there's another source book that provides that pronunciation breakdown and makes it be Sigil. So it seems like things are different. And it was funny when I asked Monty what he thought about these discrepancies. He said, maybe somebody did it to mess with Zeb. And I think that's hilarious, right? So nobody really seems to exactly know why there are two sets of pronunciations, one that sort of people remember and one that's in a lot of factual places. So let's call it a difference you can play with, right? Maybe it's like Houston Street in New York or any of these other examples where you might pronounce it. When you're out of town, you say Houston. In town, you say Houston, even though one seems to make much more sense than the other. And you can have fun with that in your campaigns.
So what are we going to do today?
Well, we thought we would kind of talk about the general topic of settings. We've been covering 5e's Planescape. Before that, we've mentioned things like Spelljammer, and they've done Dragonlance and Ravenloft and 2 Swipes. And this was made all the more interesting by Tuesday. Feels like it was an entire week ago, but Tuesday, right after we recorded, they released a D&D Beyond digital-only product, the second of this type that they've done, called Adventure Atlas: The Mortuary. And it's an expansion to Planescape the very day that Planescape was released. So that complete product was immediately added to digitally. And so we thought that would be an interesting way to say, what do you want out of a setting?
Right.
What even is a setting these days?
Right, and if you put out a setting and the same day you have additional content, what does that mean? Is this content that wouldn't fit into the book? Is this content that they thought people might not want, but we'll give it to people who would want it? And what does a setting mean to you as players, as game masters? What does it mean to us? So what is in this new Mortuary edition?
Well, I asked Zeb Cook. No. So for $10, you too can explore the mortuary, its inhabitants, and the adventures buried within. And then it tells you it gets 3 new monsters, 5 new maps, 4 climactic encounters for levels 3 to 11, droppable location for any adventures or campaigns, detailed lore, faction information, and locations within the mortuary. And they made very clear to say that it works with maps, they don't say VTT, but works with maps, works with encounters, the encounters builder.
Okay.
Which the encounters thing is like no news at all, but now they're like highlighting like, ooh, right?
Yeah.
And the maps thing, of course, being new, so it's like, hey, now like these maps work with that thing.
How many of you know what we're talking about when we say maps? Okay, pretty much everyone
Cool.
here. You can now have a sort of tabletop right out of D&D Beyond.
Like an alpha version of Owlbear Rodeo is an impolite way to put it.
Okay.
I don't mean it disparagingly. It probably sounds that way, but that's
That's pretty much what it is. And that is compatible with this.
Yeah, and so I took a look at this thing, and it's about 9,000 words. It's hard to determine the page count. Like I just chucked it into Word, and then it formats all weirdly. So I don't know how many pages it is, but it's 9,000 words. It gives you background on the Heralds of Dust. It gives you basic information on the mortuary. It's all well written. Justice Armand wrote it, and I did talk to him last night about it. They give you locations of import, and they do here. We've kind of talked about this a couple times, and some listeners have given us feedback of how they don't quite necessarily love this, but that idea of we can't really give you a layout because it's constantly changing. So instead, here's a couple of tables you can roll on to determine what you find.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to make it work in small amount of space, low amount of words,
Right.
but So that's what you get. You get kind of this idea of how you could populate your mortuary, because there isn't a mortuary necessarily. They do give you some locations which are these like encounters. And while they say it's from levels 3 to 11, what they really mean is each encounter is at a certain tier of play. So corpse receiving and shipping is 3rd to 4th level. It's very similar in concept to the beginning of the adventure, but different. It's not the same place. It's a similar place. Spirit Sump is level 5 to 7. It's a malfunctioning place where they process spirits with a really cool catwalk map and stuff like that. It's not very usable for other things, but very dramatic, cool looking. And you have to fix the problem of the Spirit Sump. The Never Vault, level 8 to 10, hazardous containment area for things that should be dead but aren't. Very cool concept. Something has gotten out. It might release other things. Stop it. The Factal Skull's Orrery. The Factal is the leader of any faction in Planescape, and Skull is the leader of the Mortuary Dusters faction. And you aid them in ending a powerful threat that has come through his orrery. And that's for 11th plus levels. And then they give you some very tiny, they say like ideas for campaigns, and it's like a idea. 5 stat blocks, animated coffin, very cool. Looks like a crab coming out of a coffin or spider, and it can pull you in. That's choice. The Factal Skull, who is a CR13 Lich leader of the Heralds of Dust. The Coffin CR3, Heralds of Dust is CR6, Necrocore, Being of Living Blood, tasty, CR7, fun at parties, and the Planar Incarnate is your catch-all CR22 representation of a plane in creature form.
Well, it's what I noticed right away, as you mentioned, is, and this is a spoiler for the adventure, but the adventure starts in the Mortuary, and if you play Planescape Torment, you are probably familiar with that. So it looks like they are targeting this to people who may want to take that adventure and either set the Mortuary as almost as a base or as a main adventuring site, or a place you can return to over and over again.
That's interesting. You know, I mean, we have this conversation a lot, but I sort of think if that's your point, then they could have done more for that to make that work. Because in some ways it gives you another version of starting in a mortuary or visiting a mortuary, but it's not an additive one. It doesn't enhance that experience. It's sort of like another one. Like, and the adventure takes you elsewhere. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a question of it. If you are giving an adventure that starts here, how much information do you want to give a DM about it at that point? How much do you want to add it somewhere else and then reference to it? Or do you want to do something like this and say, hey, you want more on the Mortuary? It's where the adventure starts.
Yeah.
Here we go. I haven't looked at it yet, except for what you just described. So we had a question.
So there was a question at this point in the audience regarding the adventure. I'm not going to exactly repeat it because it had a few spoilers, but it basically involved the Mortuary and character death and sort of saying, could this supplement provide something for that based on what the adventure has? And if you've seen the adventure, you know what they're talking about.
In the adventure, we're going to try not to spoil it heavily, at least now, but they've spoiled it left and right on the videos and stuff. But in the adventure, it's clear that you're weird in some way, and you have ways to come back, and what you said is true. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have to be in the Mortuary, but wherever the story fits is where it happens.
So I'll say briefly that last night I was asking Justice Armand, one of the cool things about being a gamehole, you can run into all these folks and just ask them whatever's on your mind. And he was saying, yeah, this was a really neat project, really enjoyed writing it. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do one of these for each faction? And I thought, yeah, that could be cool. And I guess that's where we kind of started thinking, like, in terms of you guys in the audience, like, what do you think about, like, first of all, how many folks have picked this up?
Or have ordered it, or will pick it up when it comes out.
Planescape overall?
Planescape, yeah.
Overall, yes.
Okay.
And how about this add-on, the digital-only D&D Beyond piece? Okay, maybe
I want that.
two, three folks maybe want it. Okay.
And it was a guaranteed PDF. Most likely.
That's it. Well, I was going to ask, that was one of my questions, is how much is it important that it exists in PDF form?
Yeah, I have it already.
Huh. Yeah, see, that's interesting, because they used to, as I think everybody here probably knows, or a lot of folks know, they used to provide a PDF on drive-through DM's Guild, D&D Classics, through the years, and then there would be like a D&D Beyond version later, because D&D Beyond was one of their partners, and so it would all work through the ecosystem. It would show up on Roll20, and it would show up everywhere. But there would be that PDF that you could hold on to. Not anymore. Now it's just D&D Beyond, that's it. And it doesn't print a PDF that well. So, yeah, that's interesting.
So not a lot of people raised their hand when we asked, are you going to get Planescape? Why?
I've already purchased the 3E version, the big packet, like as a PDF, and they've got their challenge is that they've got to have something that's fresher than that, but it's a setting.
Okay.
Inherently, a setting that I'm looking for is I'm not looking for stat blocks. I'm looking for the setting, the narrative.
Okay.
Context that you can place things in, and that's not edition specific. So they've already got that out.
Okay.
I already have Planebreaker.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We had a question come in. One of our listeners, Luz Talk, asked, kind of how do you see the 5e Planescape working with Planebreaker? And maybe I'll turn it around to you and say, what are you thinking of doing with Planebreaker? Would you just use Planebreaker, or would you combine them? Or?
I think I would just use Planebreaker. If one of my players picked up Planescape, I'd probably flip through it and find things to drop in.
Okay.
But Planebreaker already has me thinking of what I can use from other supplements that
Yeah.
I could, dribs and drabs in, because it has information about how you skip through different planes beyond what's in the book.
Yeah, and so for folks who don't know, Monty Cook Games put out, and no shocker because Monty Cook worked on Planescape. So as part of Monty Cook Games, they created Planebreaker as a Kickstarter campaign, and they created a 5e version of it as well. And it is a source book that talks about a comet-like body, but weird comet, that goes through planes. And as it goes through them, it picks up elements of them, people and things, and sort of drags them along in its tail, in its path. And you can visit the Planebreaker itself, that kind of moon that's hurtling around, and that's its own interesting environment. And then you can also, along its path, get to other planes. So it's almost the Sigil moving through space. But you could have the Planebreaker go through Sigil, and that would be really cool, and give you new doors and new ways and create havoc and all that.
Just blew my mind.
For me, there's a reason I started going back and exploring other games. And I'm having so much fun running other games now, looking at an $80 purchase for something I might not get back to. I'll say the only other caveat is I run public games, and I know a bunch of people that want to try D&D or try role-playing games, but they all want to try D&D.
Yeah.
Right? They don't, oh, that's nice, you work board, all that. What about D&D?
Right.
And I might do it for that, right? Get those people involved.
Yeah.
I've kind of moved on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that always is going to happen at some point. I had for a lot of folks, right? Like, I think that's a really natural thing that's totally, I mean, it's almost like we need a support group because it is really difficult. I don't know how difficult it is for you, Dave, but for me, when I was I cannot take any more 2E. And I just had to take a break from D&D for a while. It felt really strange to turn my back on something that I spent so many hours on. Yeah. But then when you do, it's like you're allergic to, and you need to, and I made it through all of 3E, but at the end of 3E, I was allergic to 3E. Oh, and if anyone gave me a 3E anything, I kind of developed a rash and had to move 5 feet away. Right. Even though I loved that so much, until the end. But then...
Yeah, the same for me. Editing a stat block, I realized I'd started editing the stat block, and I finished, and I looked up, and like an hour and a half had passed. And I was like, I just spent an hour and a half on one stat block editing it for publication. I need to do something else with my life.
Yeah.
And 4th edition came, and now it only took me 10 minutes to edit a stat block. And so I loved 4E.
Yeah.
Just for that.
Just for that. Yeah.
Just for that.
9 feet synergies and who knows what else on a stat block. You were going to say something?
Yeah, just something that bothers me a little bit about their move towards piecemeal release of monsters and that is that a lot of for me anyway, the inspiration for developing encounters myself or my group is having a book that I can flip through. Mm-hmm. And if you've got these individual monsters, where you've got to make the decision that you want that monster up front, you completely remove all the serendipity of finding these interesting connections between things, and you're going to lose something if they switch all over to that mode.
There's something antiseptic about listening to monsters and being what is this book you speak of?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. How many of you DM or create your own stuff? Most of the people here. Do you do it from a book or do you do it from a screen?
It's a mix.
Screen.
Exclusively.
Okay. And is that D&D Beyond? Is it some other third-party system that lists all the monsters?
PDF and a personal Excel sheet.
Personal Excel sheet. God bless, man.
5e tools. I was unemployed.
Yeah, 5e tools.
There's websites that want stat blocks.
Yeah, I mean, Cobalt Fight Club was huge for a while, and still probably is. So this is one of the questions as a game designer and as a RPG business person. How are people interacting with the stuff? If you can only put it out in one version, Or if it's only economical to put out in one version, what version do you use? And that you have to answer that for your own business because you may be limited in some way.
You guys are talking about like what people want in products and settings ostensibly, but the D&D Beyond product is okay, but there are other companies that are making things that are just as good, if not better, in formats that people want. Like the MCDM Monster Book is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What a great product, and the PDF is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So like they say they don't want to compete, but they're technically competing with all these people for their time and their attention.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And, I mean, if I'm gonna spend $70 on Planescape or I'm gonna spend $70 on that book, I'm gonna have to choose. I'm gonna pick the MCDM Monster Book if I want monsters.
Right.
That's where I'm at with a lot of this stuff. It's just there's so much of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an electronic versus physical. The question is the formatting, like
Okay.
whether it's a PDF, which is kind of you are given the formatting,
Right.
and you're getting it electronically versus a database
Mm-hmm.
kind of approach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. You're going to say something, Dave?
And it's interesting, they're competing against themselves again. Right?
Yeah.
Books versus a digital versus PDFs versus, they can't do a full Planescape setting box because it's already out there, like something else said.
Mm-hmm.
So what do they do for Planescape?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it's not going to appeal to everyone that wants a setting.
I have an opinion on that because I am opinionated. And I go back to the 4th edition Dark Sun, which a lot of folks kind of said, like, what's the point of this? It all exists out there. And if you look at the 4th edition campaign guide, which is very nicely written, it's really good, it is not really providing much that's original. Sometimes it combines things in a sort of new take, and splices things together in ways that hadn't been done before. But it's essentially a rehash of the old material, taking back to the beginning of the campaign. And it did really well. It really built community, really energized people, brought people into Dark Sun who'd never tried it before. It was tremendous for the setting line, and from what I hear, sold better than any other setting book for 4E, right, including Forgotten Realms. And, so it can work, right? You can just create Planescape all over again and have it really work. It's not easy, but it can, it's possible, right?
I'm with you. I don't buy into the second edition, first edition stuff already exists argument because I think the presentation in a lot of those books are trash. It's hard to read them. They're 2 columns, really small print. They smash so much stuff in there. I like reading, I have the Spelljammer Adventures in second edition. That the book has got better content in it than, in my opinion, than the 5th edition book. But the 5th edition stuff is easier to read.
That's
easier
true.
to process.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we do each time that we take on the task write better. We learn from other people's words and we craft it better and we shape it better. And I think it's interesting looking at Planescape. Like they've done a pretty good job of trying, at least through the parts that we've read so far, of keeping it quirky and interesting. But it is a lot easier to read. It maybe loses some of that flavor, but it sure is easy to read.
Yeah. And if you're trying to bring in new people to it, you want it to be that.
Yeah.
Another question.
One more thing about the presentation of Planescape. If Planescape was in a PDF, very easy to pick up, scroll through on my phone when I have the time.
Mm-hmm.
If it's presented through D&D Beyond as basically a wiki that I can search and read through, that's a larger ask to remember where I was in reading through the product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier for me to miss something if I'm clicking around in a wiki than if I'm reading a book linearly.
Along those lines too, you can't annotate. Like,
Yeah.
it's really important for me to highlight and underline and put notes in the margins,
Right.
of either a book or an unlocked PDF.
Right.
PDFs are terrible, but
Yeah.
you can't do that on DVD.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, I thought that was interesting. I'm curious as to what people are looking for. Then, are they looking for a quality reference document or a quality read? I mean, role-playing books usually have to be both of them. I find D&D Beyond texts to be very easy to navigate and find stuff in. Because everything's hyperlinked and whatnot, which, while there's good, if the PDF is set up right, there's generally pretty good stuff inside of that too, but I find the PDF is a better reading experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I go a lot of third-party books, a lot. And those are all in PDF when I'm doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm mixing and matching with stuff on D&D Beyond, all of a sudden I have to go back to D&D Beyond. don't have the two together.
Yeah.
Right? I have a PDF reader for my phone that's different than a PDF reader for my tablet. That's different than two PDF readers on my desktop, because one I might edit, one for my own personal use, and I can't do any of that with D&D.
Yeah.
And all of that I can do offline. D&D Beyond, I gotta use the app if I'm offline, which happens at places like this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the app is, again, different again from the website.
Yep.
It doesn't work the same, it's not integrated. I can't do a bunch of work in D&D Beyond on the website and have it translate to the app because they're two different databases. The searches don't even go back and forth. So it's like a whole other tool set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually I see two use cases, right? There's the planning phase, and then there's the like in the session
Right.
use case, which the D&D Beyond is awesome for, like paging. You know, those are completely different use cases.
If you're only using D&D.
No, I think he's right, because I do both. I've done both in my games too, and I can have my Google Doc with my stuff on it that I have stuff cut out for my PDF, and I can usually pretty easily find stuff. And then D&D Beyond is just hyper. It's just easy to find stuff. That is also the experience of like 50 people I've talked to.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah, no, it's true, and more people, and maybe that's one of the things that's interesting too, is that more people are becoming accustomed to running things digitally, having a laptop at the table or something at the table, tablet at the table. I don't like, as much as I feel like digital tools are still like my work, and I don't want my work at my table, and I'd love for none of my players to have a digital anything at the table. I'd like it all paper and all dice is how I'd like it. My notes printed out, that kind of thing. I'm fine with people having devices at the table, but I would like it better if there were no screens at all. And so I'm still in that world, but I think fewer and fewer people are in that world.
How many people who run games are no computer? You're running via book or paper. Nobody raised their hand. Oh, what's that?
When I run, if I can, I put all the screens in.
Screens away. So do you print things out from?
If I need to, yeah. I don't have any other source.
Okay.
laptop's my demons. I hang it on the top.
On the top
I
of
mean,
your
someone
screen.
should make a digital 3-panel laptop screen for DMs that just,
They
extend
extend.
on
I
and
have a portable screen from a portable second screen for my laptop, and I bring two
People have
tablets.
those.
There you go. There you go. Just put it all together. And
I did notice that Sean didn't ask who's running completely digital.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Left over from the pandemic, with players on both coasts, we're still playing on Roll20 exclusively.
Exclusively. And so you have Roll20 open.
We have Roll20 open, we have D&D Beyond open.
Okay.
We have the Beyond 20, not the plug-in, but between the two.
Sure.
And everybody's rolling from their D&D Beyond character sheets and moving our tokens around in Roll20. And at that point, the immersion comes simply from everybody's ability to tell the story.
Okay.
So,
And are you the game master?
yeah,
Do you have anything else open?
probably, but I can't think of it right now.
Okay. I was wondering if you had, some other PDFs open or everything's from Roll20
I
or.
have a second
yeah.
tab of mine. I have a second and third tabs of copies of D&D Beyond for monsters from the encounter block, encounter tool, and then a third tab from D&D Beyond for the digital version of we're playing through Storm King's Thunder. So
Okay.
that digital version and the hyperlinks come into play real easily.
So what happens if Wizards comes out with a virtual tabletop and all of that's just on one screen?
I'm going to be screwed. No doubt. But the only saving grace there, I think, will be that I have gone ahead and bitten the bullet and bought Storm King's Thunder also in Roll20.
Right.
So what I will lose access to is simply the hyperlinks that we just talked about.
Okay.
Everything else also happens.
They haven't really pumped Beyond 20 yet.
They haven't?
Pretty much left Beyond 20 alone. They don't change the APIs on them a lot.
yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those like uneasy truce type situations, right? Like you don't really want to. It's just this is clearly a tool that benefits everybody. It would be worse to try to stop it in any way, but it does kind of push people into not just being on our ecosystem, is I think how it's seen. What do I know? But that's my read. But
It's a good read.
Yeah.
It's probably the right one.
I mean, and well, but a lot of companies mess that up, right? Sometimes they just can't have this, and so I think they're doing the right thing, but it probably is a little difficult for them to.
Once they got their own BTT, that may be the threshold that they.
Right.
Well, being in software, being compatible with gameplay, that takes work.
It does.
Just expect it to always be the case.
Right.
So I only assume somebody on the D&D Beyond side is making sure that stays.
Yeah, the D&D Beyond owns it now, right? I think. Like, didn't they buy it from whoever originally coded it?
They don't got one.
I don't think so.
No, it's still separate. Okay.
Yeah.
It's still one guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's at least some sort of relationship there, is my understanding, and so that they're making sure it continues to work because they know it's good for them, right? And I think Roll20 just
We've seen companies, not just role-playing game companies, in the past, as Teos was saying, we have to shut that down, not even understanding that you are shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. You don't have a way to do what this is doing. And so at least they had the foresight not to make that mistake.
trying to think. So, what does an ideal setting look like? So we could take Planescape and say, okay, Planescape is a 3 slipcase book set available on D&D Beyond and in print. You get your DM screen, you get your maps, you've got the monsters, the setting guide, and adventure. What more do you want from a setting?
Or what less do you want?
Or
from a
what
setting?
less? Yeah. I'm assuming like maybe it's a setting you wanted, right? One that you didn't have the 2E version or something like that.
There's got to be something. There's got to be something really unique about it that makes it different from just a reskin of something else.
Okay.
And it's got to be unique enough, and at the same time provide DM enough insight into how the characters in that setting think. That you don't just have these cardboard pasted characters that aren't really motivated by anything deeper. So and that's hard because the stranger you make the environment, the more cognitive disconnect you have from those characters, which means you have to do some heavy lifting to help the GM kind of grok that entire that relationship so they can improv on it.
Okay. So you're talking about the content side, not the actual physical layout side of what needs to be there for you. Do you have a setting that has been published either by Wizards or by someone else that really hits that hard for you and does it really well?
Oh, that's a good question.
See, this is your panel now. You're the captain now.
I think settings by themselves are inherently kind of terrible things because they don't tell you to do anything. They're just these things that you give to people. One of the things I've liked a lot about some of the recent design, not just in D&D but in other spaces, and the D&D box sets, there's usually an adventure, a campaign that goes with them. So like you can marry the setting to the campaign. So like the stuff in the setting book actually is relevant to the adventure that's being run. I mean, you can do it the other way, but you're asking, and that's a lot of lonely fun that people like. I don't know if we necessarily live in a world where lonely fun is always the best thing.
Yeah.
So let me ask, when you've purchased a setting that has an adventure in it, do you always run that adventure? Or like, let's say, raise your hand if you most of the time would run that adventure. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I think most people would usually use that adventure.
Right.
And if not, is it still useful to have that there as an indication of what one can do?
Yes.
So it's still, you're not like, this is dead space. I don't see anybody saying this is dead space to me.
Yeah, and a lot of times, even if you don't want to run that particular thing, you can just look at the pieces and be like, okay, I can incorporate these techniques through this manner. I can bring this in from this way, and they're like, I just don't want to start there.
Yeah.
Or you can take it and be like, but I can take this part here, and that can go over here for later, and I can maybe up these guys a little bit and be fine.
Yeah.
Adventure aside, then, what's the right ratio of player content, rules, subclasses to lore content, world description, world building for you if it's just a single product setting?
Well, want to answer your question from before.
Okay, go ahead.
Domains of Dread was amazing.
Okay.
Because it fleshed out those areas, it gave you a sense of what really differentiated each of those domains. And it gave you enough of a nugget that you could drop it into another
Okay.
game really well.
Do you mean Van Richten's?
The Van Richten's.
Okay, Van Richten's
Yeah,
guide. Okay,
yeah.
cool. Good.
Great book. I can't believe that book has low sales.
I know.
Murders me.
Well, was that because they put Ravenloft out? People played, they got used to okay, we did our Ravenloft thing. Now we're moving on to the next thing. And
But I thought everybody loved Ravenloft. And
what's that?
Eberron is another one.
yeah.
Fifth edition.
Okay.
That's a great book. That has a lot. Really nice setting. Huh.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my question
Yeah.
about rules versus lore, crunch versus fluff. If you want to be very, very reductive, what's the percentage that's perfect for you or your group?
Like, how important is it that there is player content?
I think in 5e very important.
Very important for 5e.
Or for for my tables, it's important if there's player content, so players can say, "Oh, I'm playing a thing in this world," and they feel like they inhabit it more easily.
Okay.
Because taking just like a Rune Knight fighter and then dropping them into anything is you can flavor it, but it doesn't have the extra shooting. But I think the breakdown between lore and mechanics is flexible based on how it's presented.
Okay.
If the lore is all in one block, then it can be really easy to disregard.
Okay.
If it's dispersed in between mechanics, it's easier to digest. But you need a ratio that doesn't turn people away before they get to the mechanics they want.
Gotcha. All right.
So I can't give you numbers, but I can give you a formula.
and it's thinking through the books I've read, they seem to do exactly what you'd say not to do, which is here's chapter 1, it's mechanics and that's it, and here's chapters 2 through 6, which is the world and other things and monsters, and it doesn't really do it as well as what
I have
you're.
a little bit of a different opinion. I think in 5e, at least I have seen a lot of different types of players come out that weren't typically players in 4e and 3e. And they generally are not as mechanical as a lot of us, especially DMs are. They don't want to get into the super gritty nuts and bolts. They want to learn about the story. So I can hand a 30-page setting supplement to my players and they will read that, or I can hand a 70-page setting plus spells plus player options, and they might actually turn away from that.
How? Yeah.
If you want to go back to the what would I like in a box set thing, a 1 or 2 page handout for my players instead of handing a 30-page thing.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how important is it that there is like a player guide? Like, I think Paizo's pretty good in their products of adventure paths and stuff. They'll often have like a give this to your players. Like, is that super awesome? Is that key?
It helps. It's immersive.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too. We had some really interesting, for folks who can't see everybody here, we had some very polarized, I'd say, kind of reaction to the, do you want player content in the product? I tend to, I kind of don't want any. I do see how it can be helpful to players, but I just sort of feel like the players I usually play with can add their bits, and so to me it's sort of, it's fine. I don't need another subclass kind of ever again is sort of how I feel.
Someone's shouted out a very important word in all of this, which is sales.
Yes, there is that. No, and if I were directing a project, I would say you got to put some subclasses in it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, while hating it, and but that's, you got to pay the bills, and
Transactions on D&D Beyond.
Well, I hear about that, and people seem to fear it, but how many people actually do it? How many people have bought something other than an entire book? We have one person, 2 people, 3 people?
Yeah.
Okay, 3 people out of about 15.
What do you mean?
so you can buy just the
a single
subclass.
subclass instead of buying the entire book
On D&D Beyond.
on D&D Beyond. Okay.
There's a little bit of plan and confidence there. I think it's so hard to put together a class. You can do it in D&D Beyond, but it's not convenient. Sometimes it's easier just to spend $6 on 3 classes that would come with a supplement instead of buying a whole thing.
Actually, that brings up a good point. Right now, D&D Beyond is if players have individually bought content, the DM can't, like, it gets really confusing because DM thinks they've restricted it to certain things, and the player is like able to access everything, and it's like a mess.
That's a different kind of power gaming right there. Oh, you think you've restricted me? Ha! Click.
I just purchased it. Yeah. Mike Shake yells about this very often because it drives him wild, and for good reason. It is really hard to tell your players don't use this when they're seeing the digital thing that it just gives you. It just gives you stuff, and you don't know what came from what, and so there's no easy. You can't just say go to just this book.
I was running. I work for Ghostfire Gaming, and so I was running a Grim Hollow campaign with my home group. I'm like, I'd like you to keep it sort of to think, old world European Grim Hollow, Grimm's fairy tales sorts of things. So let's leave out some of the more wacky stuff that we've seen come out. And they're like, oh, okay. Try to use Grim Hollow stuff if you can. Okay. They show up at the table. I have a Haragon, right? I have a Loxodon, so I have a rabbit person and an elephant person. I'm like, I don't think you read Grimm's fairy tales because they didn't have a lot of elephant folk and rabbit folk in that. So, but it was on D&D Beyond. Yes, I know it was on D&D Beyond.
And then they've invested this time, and you're pulling their fun away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah, and you know the group, so
I do know the group. They're good luck with that. I was just telling someone about your group.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Dave.
So, going back to the format, right, the player book, right? How does, I don't even know, I haven't seen either Spelljammer or Planescape on, I haven't played that Spelljammer. But how can I hand that book out just to players? I think beyond somehow, just the player book. Or if I add them in, they get the whole thing.
Yeah, if you share them, they get, I think, all of it.
I would imagine. I don't think there's I haven't tried it, but I haven't seen a button that says restrict them to just the player book or the adventure or whatever. But
which would be great, right?
Right.
Give someone the book and not the adventure you're running. Yeah.
But
don't look at that part.
I always think of it in terms of the poor game designers who are writing these books and creating this content, who don't realize what the final product will be in terms of a book or a PDF or where it will be. And so they might say, oh, well, obviously we're going to put this thing in the adventure, but that's actually something a player would need. And you have to think about all these things when you don't know what the final product is going to look like, and it becomes a game design nightmare when you get to the end of the project and realize, if I had known this previously.
Yeah.
How much input do you have about what ends up?
You might not know. Like, I think one of my favorites was that when the D&D Encounter season for Dark Sun launched, it murdered everybody in the first session. Like, it was brutal. In fact, it said, pick on this one character and unleash on them. And the creatures were really strong, and boy, there were a lot of like Casseries dead at the table because you had to play pre-gens too. So it was like that pre-gen dies almost at every table. And then the author said, I never knew I was writing an encounters program. I was just writing for wizards for some project, and it ended up being an encounters program. Like, I had no idea this was going to be run in stores by people who don't know various, that you don't have to run it exactly as written, and so it was really tough, and they felt really bad because people were like, this was a terrible experience, and he's like, well, I wasn't writing that experience. I was, right?
That explains a lot of kind of disconnect.
Yeah, this happens a lot, and it's happened to me. It's happened to Sean. We write for a certain thing, and then somebody halfway through explains what the thing really will be, and you're like, oh. Or that there's another thing that touches on it, and you're like, oh, well, if I no.
The format, right? Like, you don't even know, like, someone's going to have read the chapter as a chapter and maybe like only plucking out portions of it from a database search.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why having like a good editor and a good producer is so important, because you hope that those editors are empowered to fix that for you and make sure that the thing that you thought was being discussed in chapter 1 is really now being discussed in chapter 8, and chapters 2 through 4 keep referencing it.
But that is a really interesting point. Like in an earlier panel you did with Joe over there, Joe Rasso, really cool topic of how you tie different worlds in a line and different products together, and the idea of starting from the top of things like gods and continents versus the bottom, like we're going to be in the village, and the village will lead to the castle, and and that difference between top down, and then you can think of this tiny chunk of the project might be used by a player in a completely different context, right? Someone makes a Harengon and wants to play it in a grimdark setting. Someone wants to take a Loxodon, and it's not Magic the Gathering or any of these other, right? Like, wow, that you almost have to now start planning at this tiny little bit of the digital chunk of it.
Right. And obviously the people in charge are the ones making these overall decisions, and they don't know what the game designers did. They just know that we need to make this 3-book set, and so here we go. We're going to do that. And the larger the company, obviously, and if you've worked for a large company in any field, you know what this is like. People making decisions sometimes have no idea what's going on, and vice versa. Yeah. And so that sort of communication is important. And that's why when Wizards hired actually in-house editors, a lot of us were like, whew,
yeah,
because those are the people that have the vision that hopefully everybody in the rest of the team doesn't have, to be able to
well, editors and developers, because and to me, developer is one of the key jobs that I think makes a product really sing, because you can have a vision, and this is true of all of us, like it's true of me. When I have a vision of a thing that I'm creating, I know all of it. It's all in my brain, but the words on the page may not actually convey all of that, because I knew so much that I forgot to properly explain. The editor might make it sound good and everything, but it's the developer that really thinks use case, thinks audience, and goes, I know what you're thinking in your brain, but you didn't write that. So here's what we have to add to it, so that it actually conveys all those things.
Or here's what the words say you were thinking. Were you really thinking that?
Were you really thinking that?
No? Okay, well, let's make it so it is what you were thinking. And the audience of a piece is important. The people who are going to be using it and the experience you want those people to have sometimes gets lost along the way. So I've written things, this is for kids. So so I will change the language I use, I will change everything, I will change the way it's explained, and then it might go to an editor who was not told that this is for kids. And so they are, adding big words and explaining things in a different way, and they just had no idea. And so all of that gets lost in the process. And so it's important to have that overall vision for everybody in the project to bring it home in the way that it needs to be.
And I once combined, almost like method acting, when I wrote for MCDM the adventure that went into their Kingdoms and Warfare book, I read Strongholds and Followers, which it reads like it's coming out of Matt's mouth, right? It's a conversational piece that he's having with you about the rules that are in there. And it's like listening to one of his YouTube videos. So I listened to a lot of his videos, and I wrote the adventure as if I was Matt writing the adventure, right? So I channeled him to try to sound like him and have the little inflections he does, the little bits there. And so it was funny, sometimes people would kind of edit that out. I'm like, well, that was deliberate. I'm trying to be Mattish, right? Like, and so if the editor isn't also trying to be Mattish, well, it won't come out Mattish, right? They'll just... But there was a reason for sometimes being circuitous or whatever, and conversational out of nowhere, right? All of a sudden, like, you know what I mean? Because that's what Matt does, right? And I think people enjoy that when reading his books generally.
It was the same with Acquisitions Incorporated, right? We wrote this, we're like, thank God this isn't a Wizards book, because we can do this as the Penny Arcade people would do it. And then we learned that Wizards was going to publish it, and we went, oh boy, we will never work for Wizards ever again. But luckily we had Scott Gray, who was editor on the Penny Arcade side, who had also done all the editing for Wizards. So he was able to very beautifully, as only Scott can do, bring it all together in a way that would make everyone happy.
And the Penny Arcade team was of one mind, which was very helpful too. So at that side, everybody understood what the wording was trying to do. So that part was all very seamless, and I think it was so coherent a package that Wizards was kind of like, okay, stamp it, move it through.
Right.
Because very little changed, but except for your parts.
Except for the parts that were a little over the top for everyone.
Oh man, those are the best parts of the book, though. But yeah, that's a different show.
For $10.99 on D&D Beyond.
Yeah,
get
you
the
can
parts that were
download
cut.
the special urine part of it,
the urine part of the adventure.
that DLC.
Yep.
I am curious. So a lot of times folks will say, as sort of feedback to us, I want what TUI provided me with the 34 setting products, and it's interesting to look at Ravenloft and say, well, Van Richten's didn't do all that well, and that was just the second product. But ignoring the business side of things, like if there is a new setting and it interests you, whether it's a Mystara, it's a Birthright, it's whatever, your favorite setting, how many products need to exist for it? Like, and if there were things like, say, this, if you saw the fairy expansion of monsters that they did as a digital-only product, or they did the digital-only Planescape thing we talked about, like, how many of those would you want?
That's how good they are.
I mean, let's say they're average. I mean, but like, I guess to what extent these days do you feel like realistically you're going to buy that one product and you're done, or do you want 5 add-ons? Do you want as many as they'll make? Like,
Right.
Probably one and done.
Okay. We had a one and done answer, which seems to be bearing out with market research that
so far, yeah.
says secondary products not only don't sell as well that makes sense,
How
but
My group enjoys the Forgotten Realms setting, so having multiple books that fit that setting is great because they already have a touch point. So, and it works for us in that aspect.
and is that just the adventures? Well, what other products did they put out for the realms that weren't just adventures? Circo's Adventures Guide. That was the book, right? That was
really, but these
Those are not official ones, but like the Moonshade Isles supplement, which is really, really good. And yeah, I agree with that. Actually, it depends how good they are.
Okay.
And that would be good for like a setting that way. Like if they did that for Grail, for instance, came out with a series of adventure books based on Grail.
Yeah, my group consumes these as adventures. They aren't seeing them as setting books.
Right.
So take Ravenloft. We're just like, great. We fight Strahd or Curse of Strahd. We fought Strahd. We already did that adventure. I don't need another book about it because we already did that. Now it's on to the next one. Now we're gonna do Icewind Dale. Now we're gonna go do Delver.
So like with Planescape, right? You've got the book, the slipcase covers, gives you the adventure, it gives you the monsters, and then it talks about Sigil and the Outlands. So now we've got a faction supplement for one of the factions. Do we want 12 supplements for 12 more factions?
It depends on how rich those. It depends on how rich that content is. Like if those factions really are unique in a way that's not just like a copy paste a different kind of motive on. Then they've got juice, right?
And what about, like, there used to be, planes of chaos, planes of law. Like, do you want the, let's actually go to the outer planes, and I'm going to give you a source book on all of those?
If they're unique enough, better. I would say
maybe.
Like if they did Descent, but you're in the Leasing Fields, essentially. Something like that.
Manual of 4 lanes for 5e.
Yeah, right. I mean, there have been things like that in the past, and 4e had an outer planes, and I forget what they called them all, outer planes and inner planes, maybe books.
I think there's got to be enough unique about the thing that they're publishing. Like for me, like Pick the App's guide to the lower planes was too superficial to really grab me.
Right.
So it depends on how much really creative content you have.
You asked a really interesting question. I remember in 2E, that's the edition I probably remember the most, even though I played all of them. And all of these setting books were coming out. Mystara, Birthright, Planescape. And I remember going to Walden Books and seeing everything there before me, trying to make purchases on my limited amount of money being in high school.
Right.
And just strategically buying typically those adventures that were generic, that I could put wherever I wanted. Because there was a host that came, the host adventure that came out there during that time frame that really appealed to me because I could put them wherever I wanted. Because I wasn't necessarily running Greyhawk adventure, or most of my early things when I was homebrew stuff. So I
Right.
wanted to be able to cut and paste, no matter how rich a setting may be. I mean, I didn't even play Forgotten Realms in 2E, but now I do in 5E.
Right.
Because I feel like it's Forgotten Realms, but it's kind of not. It's been genericized to a certain degree. It's been sanitized, and not in a bad way. I'm not using that in a bad way. So I feel like there's this.
It's almost over.
Yeah. Like I think Wizards' struggle is if I make it too specific. If I emblazon that specific module with Planescape, Spelljam, or whatever, there's going to be a subset of players that's going to say, well, I'm not running that right now. But if it's generic enough that I can possibly at some point in the indeterminate future, if I want to, cut and paste it, I can.
Yeah.
And that flexibility, whether I like it or not, and I'm using it right now or not, but in the future, might be valuable enough for me in order to buy it.
Yeah.
Now, your answer and your answer seem to be diametrically opposed. Now, maybe it's not, but you were like, I want it to be unique, I want it to be very specific.
Well, it's actually insane. I think it's insane. Like, for example, like an Outer Planes, like one of the Upper Planes. I have not yet run across something that is a really compelling narrative, powerful
Gotcha.
Upper Planes adventure because it's kind of always generic.
Yeah.
So if you had one that was, okay, yes, technically it's in the Planescape setting, but it's an Upper Planes adventure in Elysium, right? And it's really compelling characters, and there's actually conflict,
Yeah.
which is really hard for people to get their head around
Right.
in an Upper Plane. That would be really interesting.
Okay.
Because it would be generic.
Okay.
You can apply it to other sets.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, we are definitely out of time. I want to thank everybody for your questions, your comments, your thoughts. If you don't watch our show or follow our show, it is
Mastering Dungeons. Find us on Podbean. Find us on the YouTubes. Find us everywhere that fine podcasts are crafted, and also ours.
correct. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.